So this workshop is going to cover factoring trinomials when a does not equal 1. So we've covered the easier cases where we have things like x squared plus 5x plus 6. And you find, to factor this, you find two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 5. And in this case, it would be 3 times 2 is 6, 3 plus 2 is 5, and you're done. So these are the simplest case trinomials to factor. So these are when the first term, the coefficient of the x squared, is a 1. So now we're going to deal with trinomials where that first term is not a 1. So let's say we had 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. Now the first thing you should always look to do if the first coefficient is not a 1 is see if you can factor out something in common to make it a 1. So if all of these were even, then you could factor out a 2 and then proceed like you would if a was 1. But since we have a 7x here, this isn't going to work. So we have to deal with this 2x squared. So it starts out kind of similarly. We're going to have two numbers with a product, but instead of it just being the last number, it's actually going to be the first coefficient times the last coefficient. So our product is going to be 2 times 6, which is 12, and the sum is still that middle term. So the sum is still going to be 7. So two numbers that have a product of 12 and a sum of 7. So we're going to end up using 3 and 4. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 plus 4 is 7. Here is where things get quite a bit different. Rather than just skip straight to knowing our factors at the end, we use some real algebraic manipulation. We're going to continue writing. So 2x squared, and then we split the 7x into 3x plus 4x. And then we drop the 6 in. Now I want to point out here, the order of the 3x plus 4x doesn't matter. So I wrote it as 3x plus 4x. If you write it as 4x plus 3x, you're going to end up with the same answer at the end. Now I'm going to split these into two separate groups. I have my 2x squared plus 3x and my 4x plus 6, right? And what's in common with 2x squared and 3x? So I know they both have an x, but 2 and 3 don't have any common factors. So I'm going to factor out an x from the first pair. If you factor out an x from 2x squared plus 3x, you're just left with 2x plus 3. And I do the same thing for the second half. So I have 4x plus 6. What's in common with 4x and 6? Well, they're both even. So we have, if we factor out a 2, then we're left with 2x plus 3. Now, notice that these two sets of parentheses are the same now. I have a 2x plus 3 and a 2x plus 3. If they aren't the same, you made a mistake, right? I hope I'm spelling parentheses right. Parentheses aren't the same, you done goofed. So it's a good place to stop and check yourself. Now it also happens that we're almost done. Once these two parentheses are the same, what happens here is they have a common factor, and you really factor it out of both these terms, and what you're left with, so you have 2x plus 3 is going to be one of your factors. And then what's left on the outside? An x and a plus 2. That becomes your second factor. So these are a little bit trickier than the ones where a is equal to 1. Let's go ahead and distribute this back out just to make sure we did it right. So if I multiply 2x plus 3 and x plus 2, this is, we're checking, then I get 2x squared plus 4x plus 3x plus 6, which is 2x squared plus 7x plus 6, which is what we started with. All right, let's do a few more examples where we run into some different kinds of difficulties. So let's say we had 4x squared minus x minus 5. This one's a little bit different because it has negatives. We do the same thing, it's just you have to be careful when you have negatives here. You're going to end up having you're going to want to keep track of your signs. So, two numbers that multiply to 4 times negative 5, which is negative 20, and they need to add to negative 1. And it so happens this is going to be 4 and negative 5. So 4 times negative 5 is negative 20. 4 plus negative 5, negative 1. So again, we split our negative x into negative 4x, rather negative 5x. So we had a negative 5 and a positive 4. So plus 4x minus 5. Now, this is where you split you're using what's called factoring by grouping at this point. So what's in common with a 4x and a negative 5x? Just an x. So we can factor an x out, and we're left with 4x minus 5. Plus, now, 4x and minus 5 don't have anything in common. But, notice that we have a 4x minus 5, and a 4x minus 5 is our other factor. So, you're really just going to factor out a 1, which isn't going to change anything, because it's already 4x minus 5, which is what we want. Now that we have the two groups of parentheses the same, then that means our two factors are 4x minus 5 and x plus 1. Now, if you were to continue on and you were, say, finding the roots or the zeros of a quadratic function, then you would set this equal to 0. So, and then you'd end up setting each factor equal to 0. So your two roots would be x equals negative 1. And the other one, you have to maybe do a little bit of algebra to figure it out. But you would add 5. So 4x equals 5. And the other root would be x equals 5/4. Let's do a few more examples of these. Say we had negative 6x squared plus x plus 2. Now, this negative 6x squared is a real pain to deal with later on. So the best way to deal with a negative a value is we're going to factor out a negative 1, which is really just bringing a negative sign in front of the whole equation. So it's going to change the sign and everything. So we have negative 6x squared minus x minus 2. This makes your life a lot easier when you leave that negative alone until the end. Now we're going to factor the inside like normal. So product of 6 times negative 2, which is negative 12, and a sum of negative 1. Think for a little bit, and you should end up with Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. So we split our negative x, and this negative is just going to go along for the ride. I'm going to change my parentheses to brackets just because they're bigger and nicer. So we have 6x squared plus 3x minus 4x minus 2. Now again, we are going to group our terms. So what's the greatest common factor of 6x squared and 3x? And those are both not just divisible by x, but in fact we can factor out a 3x. So this is going to become 3x. If we divide 6x squared by 3x, we're left with 2x. And then 3x divided by 3x would be 1. Now here, careful with this negative here. If we're factoring out a negative, so we have a minus here, then not just, so this would be, the greatest common factor would be 2, but we're really factoring out a negative 2, which is going to change the sign on the inside. So it becomes 2x plus 1, which is what we want, right? 2x plus 1 and a 2x plus 1. And if you distributed the negative 2 back out, you would have minus 4x, and negative 2 times positive 1 would give you negative 2 again. So now here we can see that our two factors are 2x plus 1, and the other one is 3x minus 2. So the negative just goes along for the ride out front. So we have negative 2x plus 1 times 3x minus 2. And those are the two factors of this trinomial. We're going to do one more that's kind of a combination of some things you learned from the first video. So we have 12x squared minus 18x minus 12. Now, you should still always look to see if you can factor something out of all three terms, because it just makes your numbers smaller and easier to work with. If we don't, then we'd end up having to do, so a product of negative 144 and a sum of negative 18. That's a lot of numbers to check. But look, 12x squared, negative 18x, and negative 12 are all divisible by 6. So if we factor out a 6 at the beginning, then we have 2x squared minus 3x minus 2. A lot easier to deal with at this point. Now we just need to find two numbers with a product of negative 4 and a sum negative 3. Much, much nicer. There's only a few factors of negative 4 to check. And these will come out to, so negative 4 times 1, negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. So just like the negative in the last problem, the 6 is just going to go along for the ride. And we have 2x squared plus x minus 4x minus 2. And then we group our terms again. So 2x squared plus x, what do those have in common? And they both just have an x. So we have x times 2x plus 1. And then negative 4x and negative 2. Now careful, we have a negative, we have a minus 4x here. So we're really going to factor out a negative 2. So minus 2 times 2x plus 1. Which is again what we want. So 2x plus 1 is the same in both parentheses. So now at the end we're going to have the 6 again, goes along for the ride. And x minus 2 as our factors. All right, that's going to finish up this set of video notes.